Hey everyone, today we're going to be painting up the Sepulchral Stalker from Warhammer the Old World. We're going to be doing a lot of layering along with some edge highlighting, and to do this we're going to be using the paintbrush, but also the Ultra 2024 Airbrush by Harder and Steenbeck. And then to top the whole thing off, we're going to be doing an oil wash. So let's get started. So the first step will be to base the model. We're going to do that with Hull Red by Tamiya. We have the Airbrush, the Ultra, on the base setting, and we're running at around 25 psi with 10 drops of Tamiya thinner and with 10 drops of the Tamiya paint. Now with the Hull Red down as our base, we're going to come in and hit the armor on the model, and we're going to be doing that with Mephiston Red. Our goal here is to get the red inside and still show some of that Hull Red on the edges and on the outside. So we want that definition in there. You just lightly pull back on the trigger and the paint will come out nice and smooth, and it comes out really thin so we have time to move if we're not where we want to be. And then also when you lay the paint down with an airbrush, it might look really vibrant at first, but once it dries, the tone will come down. It's kind of the same as when you layer on your paints.
And remember, everything I'm doing with the airbrush can be done with the paintbrush. The only reason I'm using the airbrush is for speed. As I'm applying paint through the airbrush, I'm just rocking the trigger back and forth, transitioning from paint to air, and also how long I hold it down in specific areas. And that way we can get a more vibrant color higher up towards the top, while kind of transitioning into that darker shade and then into the Hull Red.
Now that we laid down our Mephiston Red, we're going to come in and layer up with a highlight, and for that we're going to be using Evil Sunz Scarlet. Okay, we have our collar on the second setting on the Ultra. We're running at about 20 psi, and our goal here is to get the Evil Sunz Scarlet inside the Mephiston Red. And we can do that by probably staying about a few finger points away and then just slowly pulling back on that trigger. And when it gets wet, you just want to pull away, but you'll see that brighter red come out.
If you go and spray paint this close and it starts stringing out over the model, kind of like water, into little beads, that means it's too thin, and you can try adding more paint to the bowl, or you can try lowering the air pressure on your compressor.
And as I'm going around, I'm just trying really hard to keep that Evil Sunz Scarlet inside, so we're still leaving some of that Mephiston Red and Hull Red layered out as we go around. With that Evil Sunz Scarlet over the Mephiston, we're going to come in and highlight that with Wild Rider Red. Alright, we're going to be running the Ultra on the third setting on the trigger, right around 15 psi. And the goal here is to just get it on the highest edges, still inside of that Mephiston Red and that Wild Rider Red. As I'm laying this paint down, I'm keeping my finger on the trigger the entire time so we have constant airflow, and that way I can just dry the paint as I apply it. It really helps us speed up the process. Remember too, wherever you want it more vibrant, simply just hold down the airbrush in that specific spot longer than you would where you want the transition to be less. Now with the Wild Rider Red down, we're going to come in with a black. I'm going to be using Corvus Black, and we're going to use that to base all the metal parts and other details we're going to paint. For large areas on the model, I'll use the airbrush for things like the tail and doing the back on the spines. And then when we're doing the little markings, we'll just bust out the brush for those.
When you're going around doing the small details with the brush, just take your time. If you do make a mistake, you can just go back in with the airbrush, touch that up, and go back to using the black again.
Now that we have all the black base on, we're going to come in for our metallics, and we're going to be using Decayed Metal by Scale Color. Work your way around the model, and be careful not to hit any of that red we put down already. And then if you're unsure where to put any of the metal, you can always reference the box art. Now that we have the Decayed Metal laid down, we're going to come in and layer Retributor armor over the top. And what you want to do is just layer it. Try to leave a little bit of that Decayed Metal showing underneath, kind of in the edges and down in those deepest recesses. After we get that layer of gold applied, we're going to come in and highlight now using our Vallejo metal color. When I'm edge highlighting, I'm using the side of the brush, and the brush is still just a little bit damp with paint. After we get our paint on there, I'll roll it on a paper towel just to soak up that excess moisture, and that'll give us a nice edge to work with. And that way, the paint's not going to spill over onto unwanted areas. It'll just stay on that edge. After we get our highlights in there, we'll come in and shade our metals, and to do this we're going to use Reichland Flesh Shade. Just a tip when you're putting shade on a model, you definitely don't need as much as you think you're going to need. If you leave it on there too long, you get these blotches and thick pooling. Usually after I lay it on, I try to pull most of it off, so you'll get that desired effect. You can always add more, and it's a lot harder to fix when you put too much on. After the wash is applied, we're going to come in and highlight all our black, and we're going to do this with Stegodon Scale Green. When you're laying down the Stegodon Green, just go right over the top of your black, and when you get to the tail, just leave a little tiny bit of that black showing at the top of it. And then when we get to the chest, you're just going to want to layer that black right over the top of those ridges, and we'll be doing edge highlighting later as we go on. After we lay down the Stegodon Scale Green, we're going to come in and highlight that with Sotek Green. When we're laying the Sotek Green on, we're going to come up about halfway on the tail, and we want to still keep it inside our previous layer. It doesn't need to be precise or perfect. And then when we come up here to the chest, instead of laying it right over the top, we're going to use the edge of our brush and just go about halfway again in on these ridges here, and just be gentle. And if you do make a mistake and it comes over the top onto the center of the ridge, we can just take our previous color and block that in. After we get the Sotek Green on the tail and the chest, I also did some on the hands. We're going to come in and layer up with that with Temple Guard Blue. Now when we're layering with the Temple Guard, we're going to do the same thing as before, layering in inside of our previous color, coming up a little bit, kind of up to the highest ridge point here, where the light would be hitting. We're just going to do this and work our way around the tail. Now after we get our temple guard blue apply. We're going to come in and do a spot highlight and a little bit of an edge one on that chest, and we're going to do it with blue whore. When you're doing a spot highlight, very simple. We just want to come up to the highest point there with that temple guard and just put a little bit of white by it. After we apply our highlights with the blue whore, I went in and based the headpiece in gold. Our next step is going to be taking the Ultra Airbrush and applying a layer of gloss varnish over the entire model. So I put in 10 drops of the gloss varnish with 5 drops of water, and we're going to be running the Ultra on the base setting. And we just want to work our way around the model and get a couple just smooth coats. After we get our model covered in the gloss varnish, we're going to come in and do an oil wash all over. And we're going to be doing this with a raw umber by Winsor & Newton. Once we get our oil in the dish, we'll mix in some mineral spirits. I wouldn't recommend using a good brush. And we'll just start breaking down the oil inside until we get the consistency we want to layer on the model. If you want it to be thinner and not as dark, just add more mineral spirits or just use less oil. We'll start applying the wash over the model, and what helps us is that gloss varnish helps the oil just seep to all the deepest recesses and stay off that surface. And the goal here is to just go all the way around the model applying this wash. Once your model has sat for a little bit and some of that oil is dried up, go back in with your mineral spirits on a brush and just kind of clean up the areas where you want to bring that color back to. After you're done doing that, the model is complete. If you want to take some of that shine off, you can go in and just put a thin layer of some matte varnish over the top. You can do that using the paintbrush, but I'd recommend using your airbrush if you have one. As always, I'll have all the products I used linked in the description of the video, and until the next one, take care. See you then.